and welcome to Cyberside Chats. Today we're going to talk about something that's keeping security teams up at night, the accelerating pace of software exploits.
Yeah. Well, if you've been paying attention to the news over, kind of the last year or so, we've seen this massive number of hacks that have taken place because of zero-day vulnerabilities.
And just this month, we've seen 0 days announced in Microsoft, Apple, and Android products.
Yeah, pretty much list a technology vendor, and they've had a 0 day. It's getting ridiculous.
And one thing I'm excited to dig into today is the fact that we just found out about a new 0-day exploit that contributed to the hack of the U.S. Treasury Department. So we'll dig into that today. We'll talk about these new 0-day exploits, the growing trends, and then finally we'll wrap up by talking about how you can defend yourself and your organization.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's dig into the new stuff that we just learned about the U.S. Department of Treasury hack. So, if you guys recall, back in December, we found out that the Department of Treasury had been hacked and that it had occurred because of a vulnerability in, actually not just a vulnerability, because stolen API keys in the BeyondTrust software.
Yeah.
This is used to remotely access organizations securely. So it's a security tool. And I don't know about you, I feel like this is also part of a growing trend where security software is often the cause of security issues.
Because, sure, yeah. I mean, if you listen to our pen test team, we have several pen testers who love getting their hands on security software because it basically gives them the keys to the kingdom. That stuff has root access to pretty much everything. You can manipulate file systems. It's amazing the level of access you get if you can get your hands on it.
Okay, so what happened with BeyondTrust?
All right, so with BeyondTrust, it turned out to be a couple of things. So originally, when the Treasury reported the hack, they said that it was a stolen API key that let attackers get into the cloud-based remote access system, their
the
SaaS
web
system.
platform. Yeah.
And we learned a little bit later on that when BeyondTrust was investigating this, they found 2 0-day vulnerabilities that they thought were probably being used to kind of expand on this attack.
So they announced that in December, and they patched them. And now it is February.
Yep.
And we just found out about a new 0-day vulnerability that's not just in the BeyondTrust software, it's in Postgres, the database software that BeyondTrust relies on. So now we're not just talking about a 0-day vulnerability in third-party software, it's fourth-party software. And to me, that is the scariest part.
Yeah,
it's like, who are your suppliers? Kind of like Log4j.
Well, and Rapid7 was the one that found that Postgres vulnerability.
Right.
And
Credit to Rapid7.
Credit to Rapid7 on that one. And the interesting thing about that was when they were going through and doing their research, they said that they were basically sure that this had to be exploited during the Treasury attack. Otherwise, those other 2 exploits wouldn't have worked.
Right.
And that means that the attackers, this was a really sophisticated attack chain. They used a stolen API key to get access to the platform and then executed this chain of 0-day vulnerabilities to branch out into other computers inside the Treasury Department. And it looks like specifically they were going after the Office of Foreign Asset Control, which is kind of a big deal when we talk about things like ransom payments.
So good news, we are not all targets of major nation state actors, but where the Department of Treasury goes someday, so will all of us.
Yeah.
When you see these 0 days being announced, it's really important to start patching them right away.
Yeah.
I know you and I have been talking a lot about Hafnium and the old exchange vulnerabilities that resulted in widespread seeding. So even before that 0 day was announced, Chinese state-sponsored actors were just trying to get a foothold into as many organizations as they could. And we're going to see that kind of thing again.
Well, yeah, and even bringing up Hafnium, this attack against the Treasury was by Silk Typhoon, which is Hafnium. It's the same group.
They have too many names. They
do. But no, it shows a trend. There is this big trend of targeting big commercial software and then getting a massive footprint as far as how many people you can hack simultaneously. It's kind of scary.
So it is not the case that we can do monthly patching anymore. The old cadence, or even weekly, the old cadence of patch cycles just doesn't even work. You need to make sure you have rapid vetting of software patches because you don't want to be slowed down in the event of an emergency. You need to have those conversations ahead of time about hey, if this is a critical system, are we going to issue an emergency patch and risk breaking things or risk getting hacked?
Yeah.
And you may already be hacked, let's face it, by the time the 0 day comes out.
Well, if you can automate that process, that makes these things a lot easier. But in some cases, some software doesn't have the ability to automate patching.
Right.
Or some software may just be slow in getting patches out. And so, again, you just have to be really on the ball when it comes to taking care of the software that you rely on for your operations.
Well, and that's another key point. So Google just came out with a new report about cybersecurity trends for 2025. Right. Great report, by the way. We will link it in the show notes. And one of the things they mentioned is that more vendors are being targeted.
Mhm.
So it's not just like Microsoft and Linux. It's all these different vendors, in some cases very difficult to automate.
Mhm.
So that's something to keep in mind as well, and why it's important to vet your suppliers and also think about how you're going to handle patches for not just operating systems, but other things. But speaking of operating systems, we just got a raft of new 0 days announced.
Yeah, we did. So just over the last like couple of months, we've seen 0 days announced in, as you mentioned right at the beginning of the show, Microsoft Windows, the Android operating system, Apple's iOS. I mean, they're all over the place. Like Microsoft, they just for February released an update that covered 4 new 0-day vulnerabilities, and 2 of them were really critical. One of them was an LDAP vulnerability that could allow for remote code execution. Think something that's
One
like
was file deletion.
yeah, one was random file deletion. Like you, and I just think about the implications of those. I mean, if somebody gets into your system, think about like WannaCry or something like that. WannaCry relied on a worm. And that was an automated vulnerability it could use to just execute code on whatever system it wanted to. And that was one of these vulnerabilities. The other one,
named that because it made you want to cry.
I think so. I mean, it
know,
made me want to cry.
I know.
But the other one was just random file deletion. I mean, if you could get into a system and delete security software and you didn't need to have specific privileges to do that, I mean, that means you can take that system over. Android, they had a problem with their USB video encoder, which meant that somebody could get root on your device just by playing a specifically crafted kind of video. It was a buffer overflow. We won't get into the weeds on that. And then Apple, they had a vulnerability.
An emergency patch.
Yeah, emergency patch because you could disable the USB restrictions on the Mac.
Right.
And those are supposed to keep people from
on Apple phones.
On on Apple phones too. They're supposed to keep people from siphoning data off of your device. So if it's locked, you could just turn that off. So yeah,
at least
all
it
these things are
requires
bad.
physical access. By the way, the Apple one.
The Apple one, yeah, that was a little bit better, I suppose. But yeah, I mean these things pop up constantly, and so you have to pay attention to when these releases come out and make sure that you're patching very quickly.
Well, and if it feels like the speed of exploits is increasing, it's because it is.
Yeah.
Again, from Google's report, actually they came out with a report in the fall, and they analyzed the speed to exploitation, and they found that it has dropped. The average number of days to exploit has dropped from 32 days to 5, as we talked about. That is huge. And some of the things that are driving it are interesting. One is there's more mature bug bounty programs out there now. And so we're seeing people reporting vulnerabilities to vendors more frequently. They're actually incentivized to do that, right?
Sure. Well, I mean, they should. But the problem with that is, I mean, if it gets reported and it gets publicly disclosed and you don't patch, now all the hackers know about it. And yeah, that's...
Well, it may be good news that bug bounty programs also silence the person who reported it. So sometimes they don't get fixed and sometimes they don't get reported. But anyway, bug bounty programs are contributing to more reporting of software exploits, is the theory. We're seeing more automated exploit development tools, including AI. And if you haven't seen it, check out our software supply chain webinar. It's up on YouTube. And we actually demonstrate how, I think it was WormGPT from the dark web. We used that here at LMG's laboratory to analyze leaked code and to identify vulnerabilities and then develop an exploit. And that all came about so quickly. It's so fast
it was
for hackers to develop new exploits, especially with all this leaked code. Yeah. And so this is going to be a trend that we have to continue, that we have to expect in 2025. So, okay, well, let's go over how we can defend against these threats and prepare ourselves for rapid exploitation of exploits. So,
disconnect everything from the internet.
No, stop. Patch faster. And I love that you said automate, because I think that's a key piece of this.
It is, right? I mean, if you have to do this manually for every system that you have or every piece of software that you have, I mean, you have to hire people specifically for that position, and that's just not tenable for most people.
Sysadmins do not want to work 24/7 on the weekends and holidays. Like, I still get flashbacks to Kaseya, for example, on the 4th of July. It was awful that weekend, right before the 4th of July.
Yep.
You want to monitor for known exploits in 0 days. What are some tools that you would use to do that, Matt?
I mean, if I'm monitoring for known exploits in 0 days, I'd probably be using something like Tenable or another like reputable vulnerability scanner. Don't get a free one off the internet. I mean, they do exist, and some of them are okay, but get a good one and make sure that you're running scans as frequently as you possibly can. I mean, we want to get as close to like continuous vulnerability scanning as we can possibly get to. Obviously, you can't scan and patch management. You can't scan all the time, but you can scan pretty regularly, and that's going to really help you identify if there is something known on your network.
And keep your eyes on CISA's known and exploited vulnerabilities catalog.
That's a good one too.
They're always updating it, unfortunately, and adding new things. So I like to check on it regularly, multiple times a week. And certainly if you're administering any systems, keep your eyes peeled on that. Okay, so when, not if, a system gets hacked, we want to make sure they can't spread throughout your organization. And BeyondTrust is a great example of where they're targeting external-facing hacking tools. So secure remote access, VPNs, firewalls, things like that.
Well, VPNs have 0 days all the time. We see those constantly.
I know. That's got to be a topic of a whole nother segment, I think.
We'll get to that one.
But yeah, so what can we do to help protect against that? I waited till you were sipping your tea.
You totally did, yeah. Yeah, you totally did. I mean, protecting against that, when it really comes down to it, I mean, segmenting your network is a huge part of that, making sure that if they do get in and get a foothold on something, that they don't just have free reign to everything else that's on your network.
We've been talking about that since the early 2000s.
Yeah, it's beating a dead horse, but a lot of people still don't do it, or at least don't do it correctly. So yeah, just make sure you understand like what those limitations and blocks are in your network. They're important.
Yep, and identity and access management is key. Strengthen your privileged access. Make sure you're locking that down on a need-based or just-in-time. Actually, administrative access.
Just-in-time access is great. Yeah.
Consider threat hunting. I know that this is not accessible to all organizations, but think about threat hunting for exploit attempts because, again, you may find that somebody's in your network and you didn't know about a vulnerability yet. So assume compromise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when we look back at like the Microsoft hack, the stolen API key on the back end, Microsoft didn't detect that. One of their customers who was doing some reviews of suspicious activity found it and then reported it, and that's how it actually got revealed in the first place.
SolarWinds is another great example
where
that was detected because, well, a security company was doing their homework.
Yep.
Finally, you want to make sure you're keeping tabs on your supply chain, and in particular, keep an eye on your security software. It's often like, I don't know if you call it a back door, it's the front door into your organization. And of course, they're going to try all the doorknobs and try to break in through the windows. So make sure you're making sure that your vendors are following secure development practices, that they have clear incident response plans, and that they're going to communicate openly about risks and vulnerabilities so you have an opportunity to take action. I think that's really key. Anything else you want to add, Matt?
No, I think we can jump into our takeaways and let the people get back to work.
Okay, well, make sure you patch quickly, automate when you can, lock down your privileged access, and keep an eye on your suppliers. And for more insights, check out our software supply chain webinar. Like and subscribe to Cyberside Chats, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.